Hi, so in this video we're going to explore the worksheet titled PE in Money Ratios. So at the top we're told that the price to earnings, or PE ratio, is one of the most common statistics used to assess the value of a share of stock. Stocks will be fully discussed in Chapter 9, but for now we want to introduce the basic idea of the PE ratio, right? So we want to explore this application of a ratio called a PE ratio, which again is the price to earnings for a stock. So right below the paragraph I just read is a data table for the company AT&T, right? And notice this is taken from cnbc.com, right? So this is one website you can go to look up stock information, right, if you're interested. So just some few things that's pointed out here in the worksheet. So this value listed here, where it says price 28.40. This is the share price, right? So in other words, you can see in parentheses that this means that's the price if you want to buy just one share of the stock, right? One share. So then another thing to point out is the price per earnings. So this is the PE ratio. So in this case, the PE ratio is 8, which is comparing the share price to the earnings per share, right? So in other words, right now, we're paying 8 times as much for the share of stock as what we're earning, right? And then in this box, it says earnings per share, right? So for every share, we're earning $3.55, right? All right, so if we look at number 1, it says compute the ratio of the price per share to earnings per share, and then scale the second quantity to 1, right? So we can certainly do this. So we want to set up a proportion. So I want to compare the price to the earnings, right? And this is per share. And we want to scale the second quantity 1, right? So I'm going to fill in a 1 here. So the price that we get from the table above is 28.40, and then the earnings was what, 3.55, right? So then if I calculate this, solve for x, right? If I cross multiply and divide, so if I take 28.40 times 1 divided by 355, right, we will get x, right? So if we take 28.4 and divide by 3.55, right, because multiplying by 1 doesn't influence that, then we get exactly 8, right? So this is equal to 8, so we get 8 here, right? So notice that's where this value is coming from, right? The PE ratio. So it's like setting up a proportion, scaling the second quantity 1, right? And when we scale a quantity to 1, if you remember right from the text, that's called a unit rate, right? So number 2, it says the earnings per share, the EPS statistic, is the ratio of the profits of the company made for the previous 12 months to the number of the shares available. If there were 5.9 billion shares available, use the EPS statistic to compute the profits that AT&T made, right? So to compute the profits, right, we would want to take the 5.9 billion shares that was given and multiply that times the $3.55, right? So this is the amount of earnings that they had per share. So if I take the earnings per share and multiply it by the number of shares that we have, then we can get the total number of profits, right? So if I take 5.9 times 3.55, we get 20.945, right? So this would be 20.945, and this is the units are billion of dollars, right? So almost $21 billion were made in profits, right, for that given year, right? So then number 3, it says the share price changes constantly as people trade shares with each other. If there are more buyers than sellers, the price goes down. If there are more sellers than buyers, the share price goes down, right? So what are the different ways the P ratio can increase, right? So if we just think about how the PE ratio is calculated real quick, right? So PE is where we take the share price, right? That's where the P comes from, is price, and then divide it by the earnings per share. That's the E, the earnings, price to earnings. Right, and this is per share also. Right? So if we have a fraction, right? So if I leave the denominator, right, which is the bottom of the fraction, so this is the green. If I leave the green fixed, I don't change that value, then how would I increase the PE ratio, right? So if we want the PE ratio to increase and fix the green, right, the earnings, then the share price would have to increase, right? So one way that the P ratio can increase is that the share price has to increase, right? The share price needs to increase, and this is the numerator, right? The second way is, so now we want to fix the numerator, right? So I'm going to fix the yellow, the share price, and we want to change the earnings per share, right? So how would the earnings per share have to change now in order to drive up the P ratio, right? So what would happen is the earnings per share would have to decrease, right? So the earnings per share would have to decrease, right? And this is the denominator, right? Okay. So not too bad, right? So then number 4, we were asked to compute the ratio of the dividend to the price per share and scale the second quantity to 1, right? So again, to do this, I would just make note off to the side. So we want to go the dividend to the price per share. We want to scale the second quantity to 100, right? So that would go here, 100. And this would be my unknown, right, up here. So I need to fill in the left-hand side. So if we look at the table, we want to look for the dividend, right? So dividend is here, right, 1.72. So we can fill this in, 1.72. And then the price per share was here. No, that's earnings per share, my bad. The price per share was here, right? 28.40. So we can write 28.40 here. So now if I simplify it, if I solve for x, right, x would be equal to 1.72 times 100, and then divide by 28.40. Right, so if you plug this in your calculator really quick, we get roughly 6.06. Right? Alright, so then number 5, it says the following graphic found in Peter Schiller's book Irrational Exuberance displays both PE ratios from the entire stock market and long-term interest rates. What would you estimate is the average historical PE ratio? Right? So if we look down here at the figure below, this is Schiller's graphic. Right? So this was taken out of the book referenced. So we're trying to estimate what would be the average, right, or the typical PE ratio, right, is what we're looking for. So I personally would estimate this to be, so I'll do this in green, or I'll use the yellow highlighter, right? I would estimate the typical average value to fall somewhere in here, which would be what about 15 is what I would estimate. Right, so for number 5, I would say about 15. Then for number 6, it says if PE ratios rise, what seems to happen to long-term interest rates? Right, so just for reference here, right, we're told that the blue, right, this blue is the blue graph is the price earnings ratio, where the red graph is the long-term interest rates, right? So we want to know what typically happens as PE ratios rise, right? So as the blue rises. So I would just zero in on an instance where PE ratios are rising, right? So if I look at, for example, say like this block, this chunk, right? Notice here, the blue is PE ratios. That's going up, right, in this range. So let's see what's going on in the red. So the red is going down, right? So the longer-term interest rates are going down. So let's see if that seems to happen elsewhere on the graph. So let's find another spot where the blue is going up, right, and see if the red is also going down, right? So if I look through this chunk of time here, right, you'll notice that the blue is going up and the red is going down, right? So so what we could say here is as PE ratios rise, right, the long-term interest rates, they decrease, right? So they decrease, right? All right. So then on the last page that we want to look at, this is some information that might be interesting to you. This is some advice for financial planning. So this is just one example. There's multiple recommendations or rules of thumb to use. So this was taken out of the book Your Money Ratios by Charles Farrell, right? So we're given this this table as guidelines to help us know at what age, about how our money should be, right? And one thing they just want to note is that what capital is. So you may or may not be familiar with capital. So you could research this. I just did a quick Google search, right? So capital definition. And what I came back with is the capital is your wealth and your money or your property, right? So you can think of it as like it's like it's kind of a, so if you were to have someone that passed away, right? Essentially, what's the value of that person, right? If they were to pass away, and all the things that they have, right? Rather it be if they invested in life insurance, stock, selling their car, their house, right? Their big monetary values, right? So you can think of it that way. That's what capital would be, right? And of course, this would be after paying all expenses, right? So if a person had loans and so forth, where that should be. So number 7 says you're 35 years old and make $60,000. It says how much capital should you have? Right. So by using this table, and we're given a scenario that we're 35 years old, so we're going to use this row. Right. So we're 35 years old, make $60,000. How much capital should you have? So we want to use this column, capital to income, right? This 1.4 value. So to calculate that, we can take $60,000 and multiply times the 1.4, right? And this will give us $84,000. Right? So if we made $60,000 and we were 35 years of age, it's recommended that we have $84,000 in capital. So then number 8, it says how much should you be saving this year? So if we look at the savings to income column now, right, we're told 12%. So I should be saving 12% of my income, of my $60,000. right? So if I take 12% times 60,000, that's $7,200, right? So this is how much I'm saving saving each year, right? So it might be helpful to figure out, well, how much should I put in every paycheck, right, to save the right amount, right? So for example, a lot of companies will pay like twice a month, right? So for example, at Marion Tech, I get paid twice a month, so that's 24 pay periods. So I could take $7,200, divide by 24, and this would tell me how much money I should save per paycheck, right? That way I can plan accordingly, right? So that might be helpful. You might want to break it out by month or week or so forth, right? Just depending on your needs, right? So this is just how much we should be saving per year. Then number 9 says, what should you owe on student loans? So if we look at the education to earnings, note that this ratio is 0, right? So that means we should owe $0 on our student loans, right? So this should be $0 here. I apologize. It looks like I've skipped over number 9, right? So I skipped to number 10, but it's still $0, right? So just following that chart. So number 9 is using mortgaged income, right? So we're using this value. So since we're comparing mortgage to income, if I take $60,000 times 1.9, this will leave me with what should be left on my my mortgage. So this comes out to be what, $114,000. Right, so that should be my remaining balance on my mortgage, right, for my home. And then lastly, number 11 says how much of your capital should be invested in bonds, right? So if we look at the stock to bond ratio, we should have 50% of our capital in stock and 50% in bonds. Right, so if you recall, in number 7 we calculated the capital, which was $84,000. So it's recommending that I have 50% of that in bonds, right? So if I take 50% times the 84,000 that we calculated above, you should get $42,000. Right, so out of my capital, 50% should be in bonds. That's $42,000. All right, so that's all I have for this video.